Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dabo Swinney, the Clemson Tigers, just quietly turning into one of the more dangerous teams in all of college football heading into the back half of 2024. And, it's something that we've talked a lot about, right? That week 1 game against Georgia, with everybody in the country watching that game, it got ugly. It got ugly fast in the second half. And I feel like a lot of people just stopped paying attention to this Clemson team. You take a look at the month of September and October and say there's not many teams hotter in the country than this Clemson team. And I think the fascinating conversation is I want to take a look at the pathway for Clemson to get to the college football playoffs. I think more importantly, what needs to be continued to clean up specifically on the defensive side of the football for this Clemson team to be a legitimate threat when they get into the college football playoffs. But something that's a positive takeaway for a lot of Clemson fans, you take a look at the SEC. Like, there were a lot of teams that we thought would be in the college football playoffs, probably some teams that still will be in the college football playoffs, but they don't seem to be getting much better. Right? Alabama, you got massive question marks about. You got massive question marks about Tennessee. You got some question marks about Texas now. This Clemson team seems to be getting better when a lot of teams across the country at the top end of this sport not so much. Now, for Clemson, this is kind of crazy that we're having this conversation, but what needs to be cleaned up for Clemson heading into the college football playoffs? Probably the defensive side of the football. Going to give you some of my takes on what I think has been the problem for Clemson on defense. Want to take a look at the back half of the schedule and kind of just take a look at the pathway for Clemson to get to the college football playoffs. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Clemson fans, can't thank you guys enough. Y'all know it's been a blast for me to talk this team, and the amount of support that the Clemson fans continue to show to the boys. It's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I think much more importantly, would love to hear some of your takeaways, specifically on the defensive side of the football as well. And without further ado, let's get into it. Now, you take a look at the positives. This Clemson offense, we said a couple weeks ago, this Clemson offense starting to show some life. They're showing more than just life in the month of October. You take a look at the numbers: 42 points per game scored. That's number 7 in the country. 7 yards per play. That's number 10 in the country. You look at a lot of important metrics for this Clemson offense. This is a top 10 offense that we see in the country heading into November. Now, I think the caveat is, how many good defenses have you seen over the last couple of weeks? That is certainly a question. Regardless of that, this Clemson offense is way different, feels way different than what we saw in 2023. Cade Klubnik is top 7 right now in the Heisman odds, and rightfully so. Cade Klubnik has taken a massive step from 2023 to 2024. Now, there are still some mistakes that Cade Klubnik is making, but I think every Clemson fan would agree he looks way more comfortable running this Clemson offense than we saw in 2023. Now, I don't think we have many concerns about the offense outside of just operating a little bit better in the red zone. Like, when you get into some of these bigger games in the back half of the schedule, on the road at Virginia Tech, playing Louisville at home, you go on the road at Pitt, you want to make sure you score touchdowns and not settle for field goals as much. Outside of that, I don't think you really can complain about what this Clemson offense is doing now. The Clemson defense obviously did not look good in the second half against Virginia. I think the first talking point is there were some twos and threes running when Virginia started to ramp it up. But I think regardless, that's not the standard that we're used to seeing for this Clemson defense. Now, the positive takeaway here is this front seven is starting to look like one of the best front sevens in all of college football. Like, as Peter Woods has come back healthy, there are not a lot of offensive lines that can deal with this Clemson front seven. Not only an elite defensive line, but Wade Wood has Barry Carter playing really good football at the linebacker spot. I think the big problem is in the secondary. And look, I ain't no mastermind defensive coordinator. That being said, I will give my 2 cents on what I think's been the problem. And they're playing a lot more zone than we're used to seeing this Clemson defense play. You take a look at Clemson historically: single high safety, man coverage underneath. It's an aggressive Clemson defense. And for whatever reason, you've seen Clemson in 2024 kind of deviate from that, playing a little bit more zone than we're used to seeing. And I think that's led to some communication problems. And this is the one kind of concern we had for the Clemson secondary heading into 2024, where the talent's no question. Well, we got some really, really good defensive backs. I would argue right now the best boundary cornerback duo that we see in the ACC with Avian Terrell and Jaden Lucas. The talent's there. But even with the talent, this is still kind of a young Clemson secondary, specifically at that cornerback spot. As good as Avian Terrell's been, the kid's a second-year kid. The zone coverage, it seems like they're not giving off the zones all that well. Like, how many times in some of these big explosive plays that Clemson has given up, you got guys looking at each other with their hands like kind of up like this, like what's going on? I thought I had some help over here. It seems like the bigger problem for Clemson is not that they don't have good players in the secondary. In fact, we know they have good players in the secondary. The bigger problem is they're not playing great as a unit. And I think that comes down to communication. I'm gonna give piece of advice to Dabo Swinney, this defensive coaching staff, just the guy sitting in his basement, but I'm gonna do it anyways. Let's go back to a little bit more man coverage. What's the best way to simplify a defense? Go play man. Simplify what their assignment is. And when teams play zone coverage, it's normally because, hey, we don't think we have the guys to match up against opposing wide receivers in man coverage. So we're going to play some zone. Clemson has the guys. Like, you look at the back half of the schedule, yeah, Louisville's got some weapons. Virginia Tech has some weapons. Pitt is an offense that's putting some points up on the board. Every single one of those teams that we see in the back half of the schedule, I would take Clemson's personnel on defense over what they're trotting out on offense. I trust the personnel to match up in man coverage. And so I would like to see Clemson just simplify the defense. Hey, is the problem right now is communication, it seems like? Let's cut that problem out. Play a little bit more man coverage, simplify this defense, and let this Clemson defense, that I think is one of the better personnel units in the country, let them just go play. That's probably the suggestion that I would look for. And again, you got a really good front seven that is not going to give quarterbacks a lot of time to sit there and let guys get open in man coverage. I think that would make a lot of sense for Clemson. I'm kind of interested to see if one, you're going into a bye week at probably a good time where you can clean up some of the mistakes that we're seeing. I think more importantly, let's go simplify this defense. Let's let this Clemson defense kind of do what they do. Now, you look at the back half of the schedule, and this is, I think we're going to get a good feel for just how good this Clemson team is. Although they've looked great on the football field, they haven't necessarily played the best teams in the ACC. You look at Florida State now, what we thought Wake Forest, Virginia might be a solid team. And Clemson, until the fourth quarter, played some really good football. Back after the schedule, you get Louisville coming to Clemson. This Louisville team's good. And I know their record might not say that they're very good. This is, from a talent standpoint, one of the better teams in the conference. I think that's an opportunity for us to understand how good Clemson is. You get through that, you go on the road to Blacksburg. We all know how difficult of a challenge it is to play there. And, Virginia Tech's one of those teams that seems to be getting better as 2024 goes on. We're going to get some two big tests, and then you go on the road to Pitt, which is an undefeated team right now. Not sure how long that'll last. And my 2 cents on Pitt is I don't think they're as good of a team as their record says. But regardless, that's a good team. You kind of get a bye week with Citadel. And then South Carolina, although we got question marks on the offensive side of the football, the Clemson offense is going to get a test against an elite South Carolina defense. And then you go into the ACC championship game. If you win out these last 5 football games, which I think Clemson will be favored in every single one of them, although the spread is going to be a lot smaller. These aren't just kind of bye week games for Clemson. You probably play Miami in the ACC championship game. For my 2 cents, those are the 2 best teams in the ACC. For that Miami game, it's imperative that Clemson has that secondary figured out, because you're going up against what I think is the best passing attack we see in the country with Cam Ward and the talent that they have at wide receiver. The offense is cruising, and I'm kind of interested to see if the offense can continue to cruise as the strength of schedule kind of ramps up for Clemson. But if this Clemson offense can hold serve and just kind of continue what they're doing, if this defense kind of gets back to the version of Clemson that we expected them to, which again, this is not like I'm a Michigan fan. I want Michigan's offense to get better. There's not much hope that it gets better because we ain't got good football players in offense. We don't have a quarterback. You look at Clemson and say, there is hope that this Clemson defense gets better because the personnel on Clemson's defense is very, very good. They're just not necessarily playing to the talent that they have. I think it's going to be a really fun month in November because you're going to get a sense of just how good this Clemson team is. But more importantly, it represents 4 football games outside of Citadel that you can get tested and kind of learn from it, build as a team, going into the ACC championship game and potentially going into the college football playoffs. There is certainly an avenue. I don't think that's the question. Like, the avenue is there for Clemson. They can go win the ACC. They probably get into the college football playoffs, even if they run the table and then lose to Miami in the ACC championship game. There's a pathway for Clemson to get into the college football playoffs. Now it is about Clemson getting better as a team and making themselves the most dangerous version possible to make it happen in the college football playoffs. We'll sign out on that. Getting a bye week. Nice opportunity for Clemson to, I guess you'd say, hit their stride heading into the most important 5 games of their schedule. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.